Hello, people. This week I read The History of the Medieval World by Susan Wise Bauer. And of course, by this week, I mean essentially this month. This is a long book. It's long, but it's good. This book starts from the year 312. What is it? The chapter covers 312 to 330, but every subsequent chapter is just, chunks of time like that, right? But where, let's say, you don't follow Rome from 330 all the way up to whatever year it finished on. What year did it finish on? Like 1000 or 2000, some situation like this, right? However it wanted to end. You don't follow just Rome. What you do is she'll cover Rome, right? And then it'll be Maximinus versus Licinius fighting for the throne. And we get like a little detail. Maximinus swallows poison rather than be captured, but he ate a huge meal the night before, and that slowed the poison. So what he ended up getting instead of dying was, to suffer horribly for 4 days. Try and, knock himself out against the wall, only to lose his eyesight and then die. So, sort of like a small, I guess it would be, I say, in the Roman realm, a well-known fact, right? Some of these seem to be well-known, but it's not the point of that book, right? Is to unearth something new, so to speak. Because then what we do is the next chapter will go to another place on earth. And then another, and then another. And so we almost go from, I guess, Rome, this way around the earth, India, China, South Korea, Japan, whip around to Mesoamerica. And we try and cover everything that happened in that bandwidth of time that we know of. Right? And so we start to use these other stories as connective tissue, so to speak, so that when the Jin dynasty in China is having issues, that it's tied the same as this Maximinus swallowing this poison, right? So you start to connect the events in your mind. Now, I say this because for me, for no reason whatsoever, I'm not sure why I do this, but I have, and for a long time. I think it's the way I absorb books, right? So what I'm reading, I take very personal, like it happens. So when I read a history, one, it makes it very fun, but two, it comes in like this chunk, like it happened to me. But my stuff in my life happens one block at a time, right? So today, then tomorrow, then the next day, etc. And in a weird way, the way my brain's working, it slots the crap in there like that. So that when I've read about Napoleon, it happened on this day. Now I understand that Egypt happened before Napoleon, and I shove it in back there, right? But it leads to my chronology of history stacking. So in a weird way, now again, this is a personal issue, that thing happens, and in my mind, like everything else doesn't happen. Then another thing happens, as opposed to all of it sort of happening all at once, if that makes a kind of a sense. This is how I've been taking it. It's not a big deal, but it is. Once you've been doing it too long, it starts to be a bit of a hurdle, right? Now, I understand that some people use dates to try and track things, but my brain just glazes over when it comes to dates. I'm not going to work too hard to remember this happened in the year 330, and then this one happened in the year 332. It's very boring to me. But all stories are interesting. So when you tie it this way, it starts to mesh in my mind in this great big web, right? That's what this book does. And it is quite a bit of information, quite a bit of names, quite a bit to take in. Now, I'm not saying you can't learn it all, But I am saying you probably won't get it all at one go. And that just makes this book great on a reread. Also great, like, let's say you're into Egypt right now. And then a few years later, you get into Rome. It'd be kind of cool to reread this after a good, I don't know, 6 months interest in a subject, to then refresh your brain and recoalesce things in your mind. It's really great, I think, in that sense. Again, it can't spend too much time on individual stories because it's got a lot of ground to cover. It uses its time very efficiently. It's a very good book. So what we see here early on is, and it is fascinating to see this sort of all almost happen at the same time, collectively. We end up with Constantine, the, of course, future emperor of Rome. We know that. It takes a little time to show us sort of who he beat to get to the spot. But he gets to the spot. And from the spot, he has now a problem. Problem being the sort of the size and the unwieldeliness of Rome. And his solution to this problem is Christianity. He wants to bind Romans to being Christian. And then, of course, with the emperor, him, being the chosen of God, this becomes very useful for him, right? Because before, right, the way Rome would sort of take you over, they would beat you in a war. But then they'd let you be, right? So let's say, if you're Visigoth or, some other place, you still get to be that place. You just didn't have Roman oversight. And that works. That works for a good long time. But at a certain point, at a certain number of years, right, people get ideas. You can be on way away that part of Spain, right? Britain, wherever these far distances are from Rome. And you're running your little area. You can just say, you know what? I can do everything the Romans do. I know how to administer these taxes. I know how to build these roads. I know the layout. Or probably better. These roads would be better for us because it rains more here than in Rome. And then this layout would be better for us. I don't really need to send something back to Rome, right? So I'll pledge allegiance and I'll say it with my voice, but I don't mean it in my chest. So that when the crap hits the fan, maybe I'm hesitant to send guys, and Rome will deal with its own problems. There's other, kingdoms under the Roman Empire. Maybe they'll send help, not me, right? That's a frail unity for an empire the size of Rome, who has to deal with other empires like Persia and, barbarians at the gate. So for him, this idea of everyone becoming Christian, and then it's your eternal soul. And then, now you can stay what you are as a Christian. That Christianity doesn't say you have to stop being Roman or Spaniard or whatever else you are. It doesn't say you have to stop being those things. Only that you can then be a Christian, and that I, as Constantine, am the most Christian king. I better serve God's chosen king on earth. That's the idea of what he was going with. Now, this sort of brings me to two sort of issues, side issues. One being that in our modern day beeping, that's going to beep again in a second. That other beep was a different one. In our modern day, we get, I guess, touchy about all sorts of issues. Religion being one of them. And I would say, almost irrespective of how you feel about religion, you have to admit that it had some influence on history. And if you come at this with that approach, because that's what this book's approach is. It's not a religious book. It isn't preachy in that sense. It's not making moral judgments on you if you're religious or not, on the religion itself. Only it brings this idea because these are the facts that happened. So, don't get too testy about it. You can look at it. It's not going to hurt you. It's history. It's already done. It happened 2,000 years ago, right? Don't worry about it. The next part is in that sort of the malleability of history, right? So what do I mean by this? I mean, if you were in the 1700s, maybe, the standard idea of what history is that Constantine was maybe, like let's say they're more religious, then they would say that he was actually a Christian. He actually believed in the Christ and all that rigmarole. Whereas we cut to now, and the consensus might be that he was just a politician and he used this as a tool, right? Those are very different things. There's one real person, but he's dead. And everyone who knew him's dead. And everyone who knew them is dead. It's a long time ago. We can't ask that person, right? And so we look back and we make a judgment. And we make this is what we think. This author takes what is now's most common belief on the subject from the view of most historians, right? And so you have to understand that going in. You also, it turns into a weird, like, mini history of historians, right? So in 100 years from now, we could all be very different. We could all think much more religiously than we do, like we used to do. We being humanity, not any particular place. And not that religion isn't around, but I mean in the sense of, right, in your 12th century where kings would, strip down and walk on their hands and knees if the Pope excommunicated them. Trump ain't walking on his hands and knees if the Pope excommunicates him. It's changed, but it could change again. But that we can see, because like in 100 years, someone could read this book and get a sense of what historians thought then and compare it to historians in the future, which would be there now, right? Is that making sense? It's a cool little subplot if you're looking through this. Now, what I would suggest to you is, because that's amorphous, right? What I would suggest, and what I normally do, is I just sort of ingest whatever the author's feeding out, how they want to feed it out. If this had become very religious heavy, I would have taken it like that. Just sort of like in the waiting room, so to speak, until it's all done. Then you hold it out at arm's length, look it over, and then make an opinion, right? So you can say, I trust these facts, but I'm also aware such and such authors highly biased in this way, and I'll take it like this, right? That's what you should do with this book. You take it as it comes, irrespective of what you believe, right? You might believe Constantine was a hyper-devout Christian. You might think he was a dirty politician. Just take it how it's presented, then form your opinion after the fact, and it'll be much more easygoing for you, right? Doesn't mean you have to believe the opposite of what you believe. Just ingest it for a bit. So, we're in the year 300. And Constantine's first issue in wanting to use this Christianity is Christianity itself. What do I mean by that? The question at the time was the main question. The nature of the Christ. What are we talking about? Well, the Christianity sees it as Jesus Christ was a real person, a real man, but he was also God on earth. Right? Now, what they started arguing, and they started arguing from like the 2nd century, meaning Jesus dies, 2 years later, they're arguing, right? Because they're going, okay, what is it? They would say, okay, Jesus is God, but Jesus is also a man. But men are corruptible. But God can't be corrupted. Ergo, the man couldn't have been God, but we know Jesus was God. Right? How do I square that? What is it? We had Greeks running around saying all matter is inherently corrupted. So they're like, Jesus can't have been blasting everything. Oh, blasting everything. So they're like, Jesus can't have been a man and God. This is the major argument, and they got heated about it. When I think this is what they went with. They went with Jesus is God, but that when he was a man, he was divine, right? So he had the all blessing, and in that sense, he can be a quote corruptible but not corrupted man with God's favor. But then God doesn't have to weaken himself by being in a corruptible body. This kind of energy. And, I'm pretty sure Constantine thought that was pretty sweet. Divine favor. He's like, I could use that, right? This is the angle the book takes. In any case, the main point is that he had, almost by law, chosen a unified idea of what Christianity is. And that sort of became the root, and people flocked to it. And the outside questions got sort of mostly pushed aside, right? We have a thing that functions. Obviously, it's God's will, because look at this big Roman emperor who's agreed. He's moving the emperor's heart. This kind of energy, and it sort of makes the first Christian empire, so to speak. We then cut to, at the same time he's doing that, we cut to the Jin dynasty, 313-402. And I haven't done a deep dive into Chinese history, ancient history. I want to. I have a book over there. I haven't read it yet. But they call it, this is what is it? There are the 9 princes whose infighting has, weakened the main state. And then outside of this, amongst the barbarians, are the 16 kingdoms. That's what they call it. And it's really cool to see that at the same time, both China and Rome are having sort of the same issue. That issue being like civilization, more or less, in amongst a sea of barbarians, right? And to me, it's got to be kind of wild. It's got to be kind of wild to be in that sort of a situation. And when I say barbarians, right, I do mean barbarians, right? So Rome, and in this part of China, they've been around maybe 100, like 700 years or some long extended time. They have literature. They have plumbing. They're clean. They have houses. They have a structure. They have a king that survived all this time. And outside, the barbarians, when they kill you, might dip your head in silver and turn it into a goblet, right? So I'm like, the civilized people might banish you from the city. The barbarian is drinking out of your skull. That is two vastly different things. We have in the Jin area, what ends up happening, and this happens in Rome as well, and you see it in these first few chapters, is the barbarians are outside and they see that nice stuff inside and they want some of it. They want a nice life. But they don't want to take it at first. They want to own it, to become it. So the one of the barbarians, gets sort of comes to his ascendancy. He's stronger than the others. He then attacks the Jin. But he doesn't want to attack to just wipe, to pillage, to destroy. He wants to take it over. The same thing happens in Rome, and it's weird to see it happen at the same time almost, where the barbarians come in and want the shine on them. The what's it called him? Fujian works really hard to make himself Chinese, dresses Chinese, uses their language, will set up his government the way theirs is. But of course, they're never going to let you in the club. That just doesn't happen. This is just cool to me. They have the Battle of the Fei River. And the book says it's now dry. It's just wild to me. I love somehow like the history is alive because the river bed is still there, but somehow the river went dry. I don't know how rivers go dry. But I can point to it and say when there was water flowing, we had a battle right here and bodies were piling up. It's just, I love this kind of energy. The book's full of those things. Full of these little moments that happen, these battles. Scale is off the chart, 100,000 here versus 100,000 there. Full of those battles. And then, of course, it comes back to sort of a wide, broad brush. Because now, in amongst all these warring princes and these warring kingdoms and these constant invasions and this constant threat of barbarians running through, destroying everything, we have Buddhism. Buddhism sort of comes into play in a bigger way in China. Again, at about the same time Christianity is coming to Rome. It's very wild that both of these have the same motions happening. And you can see it because of the way, the book is laid out. Meanwhile, in India, absolute chaos. We get now again, I see this a lot in history. Our Chandragupta is a small kingdom in amongst a bunch of other kingdoms. And he sort of starts to build. His son, Samudragupta, takes the ball and rolls with it, right? You sort of need a launching pad to get sort of these big things done. It seems to be in history. In any case, he wants, what India does, and they all seem to do this. Again, once you see them side to side, you start to notice the similarities. What India does is this guy uses Sanskrit as his main official language. That's the language of the scholars, the language of the court, the language of the king. Sanskrit being a much, much older language. And so what they want is that gravitas, that lineage. They want to be more than just a small town king of a little kingdom in the middle of nowhere. They want to be connected to this grandiose thing that makes it more than what they are. Rome really latched on to the Greeks. And then subsequently, right, kings constantly latch on to Rome. It's just a thing, it's just a thing. I think Saddam Hussein wanted in his mind to bring back the Persian Empire. It's just a motif you see that's repeated in history. It's always a reach back to coach yourself in the glory and gravitas of history. Now, India seems to be a place that's really run by sort of like the strength of one person. Like one guy will get the juices flowing, and he'll lead them to this great level. And then when he dies off, it seems to scatter. It doesn't seem to hold very consistently in India for whatever reason. I'm not exactly sure. But this king, what did they say? The thing that made him great was they said that he had all the land and you could work the land and get a certain amount of payment for that labor, but no one was a slave, no one was a serf. If you wanted to leave, you could just leave. If you wanted to stay, you could stay. He didn't behead all of his criminals. He said even this historian, by he I mean this historian, says that this king, this Samudragupta, would fine you if you broke the law. And at worst, like a repeat offender might get a hand chopped off. And you're like, well, that seems pretty severe. But again, on the scale of things, this is civilization. This is what it looks like. And it's fun in this book to watch humanity, I guess, struggle and by trial and error sort of come to grips with law and order, right? What's the right way to rule these people? What way will the people accept? And you see kingdom after kingdom try what they think works and then see how it doesn't work. And then the next kingdom sort of wants to use the bits that did and add new bits. And we just keep trying various combinations. It's very fun to watch it in action almost. Now, I do have to mention the India section. Jesus, stop doing that. The India section, the China section, I will readily admit that I haven't grown up with familiarity with these names, right? I've mostly come up with, once it gets into the British section, I really latch on. I know a lot more of that. But these names are foreign to me. They're harder to say. And it's harder to grab a hold of them in my mind. But that's not to do with the author. The author lays it out as clean as the rest of it. It's purely a me issue, right? And like I said, I'm not even mad at the book for this, but I am. It's nice to know that once I sort of do a deep dive into a various history, I could come back to this one and help it all stitch together. But it might be a problem for either side, right? So if you're from these areas, you might not be as used to these names as we are, and you might have the same problem, but in reverse. So just sort of know that going in. But also there's like 10,000 names in this, and you're probably not going to remember them all anyway. So, don't get too hung up on trying to remember everything. Just let it wash over you and enjoy. We then cut to Shapur, king of the Persian Empire. And they're having the same problem as India, same problem as China, same problem as Rome. Barbarians at the gate. For them, the barbarians are Arabs. Here's the point where in history you see this sort of moment and you can't help but imagine, right? Because here's Rome, right? And here's the Mediterranean, I would say. And there's Persia, essentially, right? So they're just sort of facing each other. And you would imagine, like, if these two power blocks could have sort of left each other alone for a good 400 years or 300 years, right? You wonder what the world would have looked like. Because if they had not sort of fought each other in any sense, if they would have just said, here's a line, I'm not saying you're better than me, but I'm going to say I'm going to leave you be and you leave me be. And now I have a front of safety and all my enemies are outside of that. I can just push out, right? They could have then conquered out into the barbarian horde, quelled it, and who knows, come back at each other at a later point. But one of them decides to make, Christianity their big to-do. And we know where Jewland is. And we know Jesus was all up in Jewland. And they're the same as us. When we watch Lord of the Rings 19 times, and we grow up, and we have jobs, and we have this pile of cash, and we go, you know what I'm going to do with this pile of cash? I'm going to fly down to Middle Earth, New Zealand, and check out where the Hobbit hole was. Right? The early Christians were exactly the same. They want to go where Jesus was. I want to walk the same streets. I want to touch that wall he touched. I got to hang out there. But the problem is, this in the middle of that guy's kingdom. Now, if you're Constantine, you're like, my good friend, King of Persia. Can you not, mess with my Christians? They're not going to do anything. They're just going to go down there, touch the wall, and then they're probably going to come back home. They're just really, they're big into Jesus. And the Persian guy's like, this is fine. I'm fine with this. But at a certain point, he wasn't fine with it. Of course, because why would you be? There's a lot of dudes. It starts to become out of your control. Because, one of them or two Christians is going to go, this belongs to God. And my king's God's king. So I think he should have it, right? There's always going to be this whispering. In any case, because Jesus hung out in Jew land and not Rome, we get this problem. And so we then see sort of clashes between these two. Constantine at some point is like, okay, I'm going to start a crusade. And he's the first emperor to want to lead an army behind the cross, which of course is a historic moment. And I'm gonna get baptized in the Jordan River. And I'm like, that sounds really good. That sounds all really good. Of course, he then gets sick and dies. And so that crusade's postponed. And we have infighting. What is it? His sons. His 3 sons, he wants them co-emperors. One gets Gaul, one gets Italy, one gets sort of the Africa region. And their sons, they should get along, right? No, we're never going to get along. They never do. They just never do. I don't know what it is. But they can't help themselves. They're power hungry. People die. Right? There's a lot of that in this book. There's a lot of, I took over, so now I'm going to kill I'm going to kill him and his 2 sons, which are, like 5. Sucks, but I got to do it. And probably his wife, because a couple of times they've left the wife and she goes, mad because her kids died. I just want the issue. A lot of killing, like in that sense. But through all this killing, one guy lives. His name is Julian. Julian grows up. Julian has, all the requisites to have official ties to all the sauce, right? I get the big seat by blood, by birth, etc. He ends up with the big seat. Now, his big thing is, and you're always going to have this as well, is resistance, right? There's a resistance to the new way. There is some love of the old way. This is what Emperor Julian wants. He wants to reestablish Rome the way Rome was with Roman gods. He didn't like all these Christians and all this rigmarole. And so he goes to Rome and reopens the temples, right, that they had closed. He wants no Christian to be allowed to be a teacher, and education's required to be a government official, which would then eventually have X'd them out. So what's interesting here is sort of you can watch the standards these people had. Because the Christians are on the outs, so they want to then make their own literature. That's what they said. Not written, or written by their cats and not historic. Not from Plato and whatnot. And they said it sucked. They said no one liked it. And that's what he used against them. He's like, they're just barely better than barbarians. They have no literature. They have no sort of class. But it's wild to me to see that that's what the society wanted. Because you can't just say, right, like if you go, such and such world leader, like if, again, I'm going to go with Trump. Trump doesn't read books. It's not going to lose him any votes. We aren't of a culture that puts a value on that. In that sense, in a sense to say, I can't pick a military leader because he's not well read in Plato. We don't care. We want to know if he can do X, Y, and Z on the job. So Trump's sort of standard is business. Whatever the business is, we don't care. As long as you're successful at it. If you find a way to sell chocolate, we'll put you up there with the other moguls, the computer ones and the oil tycoons. These are the things that move the needle for us, not literature. But for these Romans, it was literature. And it's cool to see that not separation, that value system changed throughout the eons. And you see later in this book when sort of the Goths and the Vandals start to, smash Rome, and then they sort of run the thing. We get a what is it? I wanted into your clubhouse, but you didn't accept me into your clubhouse. So now I'm going to pretend like my clubhouse is actually better than yours, and I never wanted to be in yours anyway. That kind of energy starts to show up. Because the Vandal types, the Goths, are like, you're going to make a boy soft with all that reading, right? It's almost like derogatory, where you whipped back the other way. You wanted to be like them when they didn't accept you. Now you're like just going to denigrate everything they were about. And then, of course, generations in, and now that's just how they think. They don't respect a man who's learned as much as a warrior. You may be an idiot, but if you know how to chop heads off, you're the guy we're going to go with. And that has ramifications on down the line in history. And you'll start to see them all click together. But it's cool to see that moment where that sort of sour energy is what caused this. Now, it was all going good for Julian until he unfortunately caught a spear fighting the Persians. Right to the old guts. And if you didn't know, if you take a Persian spear to the gut, that could probably kill you. And it killed him. He's one of 3 Roman emperors who died in battle against a foreign opponent. So, that's good for him. But his dream of re-Romification sort of died with him. We whipped it back immediately to what was working and just sort of continued to lean on it. By this time, people are like, well, I'm just a Christian for real. And it just starts to steamroll. The book's very long, and what starts to be is like one after the other. You see this degradation from these massive civilizations down to small kingdoms, down to big ones, and then it's like you're watching the world form to the modern world we know. And the roots of all of it is sort of in this book. So if you're interested in any sort of these histories, this is a solid book. Like, how did Austria come to be? Why Austria? Why Germany? Why France? We sort of get the roots from the ground up of all of them. But, for this purpose of this video, I can't spend 15 hours telling you this guy got big and then died, and then his sons took over, and then they fought, and then that one lived, and then he died by, getting bit by wolves, died by poison, died by getting a spear in the chest, etc., etc. Get tricked. All of it just, I wouldn't say it's not jumbled in there. It's jumbled in my mind now after the fact, but it's not jumbled in the book. But it is a lot. And I can't go through every little bit. So I think we'll cover about 2 more issues and then call it a day. Big issue. Krakatoa. Right? And what do we have? The islands of Sumatra and Java. And we get it from their point of view, where it used to be one big island and a really nice kingdom on the island. Until, of course, it exploded. And now it's 2 islands. And that kingdom never recovers, because how can you recover? But then the after effects. And our author puts a lot on this. It's an explosion that was heard all the way in China. The ash for the next 18 months affected our sky, right? So we have reports from Rome, reports from Persia, all over, of saying how the sun sort of lost its luster for a year. The moon was in a haze. And, well, you're like, well, that's not that big a deal. It's just sort of cloudy all the time. I'm like, no, because crops. Some crops need X amount of sunlight to grow. Others need X amount of sunlight to ripen. So now we have unripened grapes, unripened food on the vines, and then other crops that aren't going to come in. And then it turns into a large sort of famine famines of weakened human body. What comes with weakened human bodies? Pestilence. All these things sort of are ramifications of this one volcanic event. And it affected all of the empires and kingdoms that we've been covering up till now. And it sort of affected them for a good while after the fact. Certain kings who, for certain reasons, may have had livestock instead of grain, may have done better, and then they win other wars. It has this kind of effect. It tipped a lot of scales in a lot of ways. We then cut to the Mesoamericans. This is your Aztecs. This is your Zapotec. The Zapotec there before the Aztecs even. We're a long ways back. And this part was very interesting to me because now on this sort of chunk of the world, we don't have a lot of writing from these people because they didn't write in that sense. Your Europe, your China, you're these people, from tablets to scrolls. Let's keep the scrolls safe. The Mesoamericans didn't. Now, I think I've seen a video where we're starting to understand they may have had a written language, just that when the Spanish explorers came, they didn't know it. They had what they call knots, like a rope knot system that could have been a language. Like, so I essentially could have had a book of strings with various knots in various ways that would tell a story. And in that sense, I could have then written stories down about history, lineages, all the things a historian would want to know. But, what the crap is a Spaniard going to do with that? What is this, a mop? And then he yeeted it. So we don't have a lot of them, and we don't have it deciphered yet. But it's very interesting as new technology comes. Maybe we can figure that out. Maybe we can glean more information out of this. In any case, this author tells us what we do know from what we do know. And to me, it's highly interested. Again, I haven't done a deep dive into this history either, and I'm very eager to. He says, and we're going way back now, he says that for, the purpose of writing for Romans, for Egyptians, for these early cats in this area was commerce, right? So you'll have a lot of, on cuneiform tablets, right? Your old receipt of, you gave me 12 head of cattle, I owe you 27 silver and 1 pig. Signed, Bartholomew J. Edgar Hoover. Okay, maybe Hoover wasn't a Sumatran name, but Bartholomew definitely was. Receipts. Our Mesoamericans did not. Now, maybe they had their rope language and that's all they needed. What their writing, carvings, the things we found were dedicated to was timekeeping. That to these people, time was a big issue. Now, we all know ye old Mayan calendar is wicked crispy cool. It's a base 20 on multiples of 20. And so it repeats every 260 days. And the math goes wicked. So you'll get a cycle of 260 days. And then those cycles can then be broken down into cycles of 52 years. And 52 years can get broken down, etc., etc., etc. The scale goes from day all the way up to sort of galactic. I think where when all the planets align, now this is my opinion, the book did not say this part. When all the planets in our solar system align, you can count that as A. And then, of course, they loop around, and then at some point they'll align again. I think this is like 1,000, 2,000 years. I don't know, 3,000 years. I don't know how long it takes for all of them, like Mars, Earth, Venus, all of them just to randomly line up again. If that's your clock, right? That's 12, and now that's 12 again. And if you just name that 1A and then 2A, then every iteration of days in between, we can mathematically find a way to get to. right? So if I know where the planets are, I could know what day it was in relation if I had all of it scaled out. Does that make sense? So if my calendar is the stars aligning, then I can go through every one of these days. That's how they had a system to essentially have a marker specific to each one of those days. Now, in that, one of those days may be, like a Monday. Monday B17 year of the rat. However the verbiage goes, I'm not sure. But each one of the markers would be more and more specific, right? Until we got, this is the one day. Here's exactly where that was in relation to these planets, right? It's time. We're keeping track of time. It's cool that they can do it. It's cool that it's mathematically possible. But what they then did is, I have this thing. And so now each one of the days becomes very important to them. Specifically, not just that this happened right on a Monday, but on a Monday in a year of the rat, in a cycle of the moon of this, in the third era, in the second era, in the year of the rat, on a Monday. This great king was born, and I've been born the same day. Ergo, I'm that great king. Right? And add to this their idea of, what is this guy's name? Quetzalcoatl? I did not say that right. The word's like 9 hours long. Quetzalcoatl, I believe. The feathered serpent god. This is their main god. This is, in their mythology, the gods went to war and everyone died. And this god's job was then to come and grab the bone of a man and the bone of a woman. And it says to then slice his penis, ouch, and drip blood on those bones. And then, boom, they're back to life. And so now we have a people tracking, who blood brought them back to life. And they can track all the days. So in their heads, death isn't sort of a Christian negative as so much as a way to bind yourself to this great calendar, which is just a marker of all the events that have happened. And you've bound yourself to them. So they existed to get you to where you are. And you'll exist to get the next generation to where they are. And you're remembered on this great cosmic calendar. And the things that you do will be etched onto the day. And in the future, that day may be avoided or repeated. And so now I have not just a king on a temple of the feathered god. I have all of my kings, right? He's the same as all the others. When he's cutting himself and letting the blood drip onto the temple, he's not just recreating. He is, in their mind, actively doing the same thing Quetzalcoatl did in rejuvenating humanity back into existence, right? So they start to see, what is it? The land of the living is next to the land of the dead. They're the same, right? They're mirrors of each other. You can't have one without the other. It's dark. It's the daylight and the nighttime. One's not evil. One's not good. They're stuck, right? They have the temple of the feathered serpent, where it is. There's the temple of the serpent. What is it? The temple of the sun, the temple of the moon. They're laid out like your pyramids in relation to things in the heavens, the stars. But then at the base of that temple, they said specifically, at the base of each corner is a mass grave with 400 some odd bodies. And then, of course, other bodies in other places at other sacred numbers. But we see that as like, Jesus, you killed 200 people, just put it under this building. They see it as a blessing of life from this death. It's just this very different, very odd way of seeing life and death. And then you see how then it affects this civilization. Very, very interesting to me. And you have, what is it, the city of Teotihuacan, which is, I believe a megalithic site. I don't remember. Where at the time, the king would have been ruling some 125, 200,000 people. These are massive cities with this belief system, right? It's just, and I could see some of that sort of manifesting in Native Americans of America, the Indians, right? Where we're all part of the earth. I'm like, but you see the roots of it way deep in this history. I can also see when you watch sort of the cartel levels of violence, and I always wonder, like, why Mexico accepts it. And I wonder if deep down this cultural language exists in amongst Mexico that makes this more all right than it would be in another country, so to speak. You wonder now, after I read this, if some of that stuff does manifest like that. To me, it's very highly interesting. But, so this is where I'll end it. Because you're like, that's all really cool and all. Vicious, bloody, yes. But I can understand the logic of your people's thinking, right? And it's functioning, right? You have 200,000 people working and living in this city. I guess it works. Got to Krakatoa blowing up. Somewhere this king wakes up one day. Everything's going good. But way far away that way, in a place he's never heard of, Krakatoa explodes. Pumps out all this smoke. It covers the earth. Now you're sitting there. The skies darken. That's not good. Gods must be mad at me. Start looking through the days. Have we had another day like this? No, those aren't good either. And just as you're about to figure that out, of course, crops start failing. People start dying. That's bad. But unlike sort of Europe, where I guess Christianity told people to suffer and like it, your king is punishing you, but you'll figure it out. These people are a blood in, blood out culture where, blood's not that big a deal. So, what happens to this king? Well, we all know what happens. Massive riot happens. All these people just show up. I think he says in around year 600. They just start marching up the Avenue of the Dead. I'm like, well, you named it, not me. And they just start hacking up government officials, priests. I'm assuming they killed the king. And again, from their perspective, it isn't like vindictive. It's trying to appease the god. And he might be appeased by this blood. It can't be commoner blood. It's not a common problem. And it's fine, I guess it's fine for the people. It sort of sucks for the king, but he's like, what can he do? You were living, cutting people up and letting the blood run down the steps, and now it's your blood running down the steps. And, not long after that, the city's basically abandoned. And then later, the Aztecs will come and live in it, I guess, for a while. But there's still this burned, charred marks, the remnants of, skulls bashed in. The remnants of violence are still apparent in some spots here. In the, what do I want to say? Archaeology of the spot. Very interesting. And that's where I'm going to stop yapping about this book. It is very good. I do recommend it. The language isn't like over the top pretty, but it's not supposed to be. It's functional to what it wants to do. Highly functional. A lot of information. I think you'd be happy with your purchase. And speaking of purchases, ad time. These are my books. If you want to purchase one, they'll help the channel. You can also get, as of the time of this recording, Kindle Unlimited and read my books there. And I think I'll get some cheddar from that. Sort of a Spotify levels of cheddar, but in book form. And you can read other books on that. And, in case mine suck, you wouldn't have wasted your money. Or you can just subscribe. I guess that helps the channel. You can comment. That's always interesting. Or you can just enjoy, hearing me yammer. Okay, people. I will talk to you all next week.